Hello my dear friends, you're on the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 13th of January of 2023. Today we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. And of course, we are going to start with the town by the name of Soledar. As you can see, according to the Russian source map, there are a lot of updates on this map, and as you can see, the map has been updated. Now the Russians shows that they established control over entire Soledar, including the residential area that located on the northwest of Soledar, right in front of railroad station Sol. This one. Furthermore, when talking about this map, you see that there is an icon showing that there is a soldier on the Russian flag and an arrow pointing exactly on the railroad station Sol. And today during the day, we receive an update that the Russians, during a storm process of the railroad station Sol, managed to enter this town from two sides. And they didn't clarify exactly which sides they were talking about, but anyway, also they added that the Russians established control over the railroad station. This building is now under Russian control. The sources haven't reported or noticed about any attempts of crossing of railroad rockade, and for now I'm not sure if the Russians crossed the railroad rockade, because to take this railroad station is very important, and this railroad station is located on the Russian side. But anyway, the most important part in this mission is to cross the railroad, these lines, because it's a very difficult job. We saw a lot of examples in the past when the Russians and the Ukrainians were trying to cross the railroad rockades, and all those attempts failed. I'm talking about even about Kupin's Frontline. If you remember, there is a town by the name of Novosilovska. This one, the Ukrainians were trying to cross this railroad rockade for many times, for many months, but as a result of all those clashes, the Ukrainians were defeated and were forced to step back. So the same thing we can see right now in Soledar, and we received a lot of updates about Soledar, about the clashes and so on. But I'll repeat you one more time: the most important thing is to cross railroad rockade and to establish stable bridgehead on this side of railroad rockade. Let's return back to the Western sources map. As you can see, this map also has been updated a little bit now. The Western source map also shows an icon, the flag. That means that according to the Russian sources, the Russians managed to establish 100% control over this town. Furthermore, the Russians reported that during the previous 3 days of clashes of storm operation of Soledar, the Ukrainians lost more than 700 soldiers and more than 300 armored vehicles. So the losses of the Ukrainians are very high, and these losses is just for 3 days. And if you remember, the Russians started the active phase of this offensive operation in the end of December, and just in the beginning of January, right after the Christmas. If you remember, there was a ceasefire. Right, exactly after a ceasefire period, the Russians managed to establish control almost over entire Soledar. And now, when talking about Soledar, I believe that it's time to update this map just for better understanding of the situation. So the Russians reported that they managed to enter this railroad station Sol from at least two sides. So I believe that they control this is the railroad station, and they control the railroad station. So I believe that this territory is on the Russians. And now it goes to the south, it goes here, and I believe that the Russians control ends somewhere here. So this is the territory that the Russians control according to the source, according to information we have right now. The Ukrainian source and the Western sources still deny the progress of the Russians. They are saying that there are still heavy clashes in Soledar. And when they're saying about heavy clashes in Soledar, you need to understand that they're completely correct and they're completely right, because when talking about Soledar and the border of Soledar, you're gonna see that Soledar starts somewhere at the north of Bakhmutskaya. So this is, as you can see, these gray dots, this is the, let's say, southeast border of Soledar. And when talking about the northern western part of border of Soledar, it ends with the railroad station Sol. So when talking about this part of this town, of this area, this is also Soledar. So when the Western sources are saying that Soledar is still under Ukrainians, that from this perspective they're completely right. When talking about some parts of Soledar, for now the Russians control central part, western part, eastern part, and the only part that's still on the Ukrainians is the railroad station Sol. Sol railroad station is not a separate town or separate place. It's the same town, but it has some kind of title just for from the geographic perspective. Nothing more, and this is still Soledar. And the Russians want to fix this issue, trying to storm this town, and today they entered. And I'll repeat one more time: we need to expect when the Russians cross the railroad, this railroad. As soon as they do this, you need to understand that everything might collapse very fast. Furthermore, today we receive a lot of updates from Krasnogora, Poroskovivka, and so on. The Russians these days, as I understand, attacking in this direction, in the middle part, because there is some industrial zone, very small, it's just a small checkpoint. Let's take a look at this area closer. So this is Podgorodny. I'm talking about these small farms, maybe the farms, there may be some kind of building. So it's like the checkpoint that the Russians want to use, a small local bridgehead. This checkpoint, this forest as the base, as the bridgehead to develop their offensive operation in the direction of Poroskovivka and Krasnogora. And when talking about these two towns, we understand that the most important area on this front line is the Poroskovivka railroad station, this one. Furthermore, today the Russians reported that as a result of the offensive operation Soledar, they managed to cut the road that connects Bakhmut and Soledar. At least they established some kind of artillery fire control. They haven't established physical control, but they are saying that the fire control that they have established is enough to cut the 100% supply and support of Soledar and the most important of Seversk. I believe that Ukraine still uses this road. Of course, they have a lot of losses and not sometimes they might be spotted by the Russians, but anyway, I believe that their losses by using this road highly increased. Another important thing, and why the Russians attacking or trying to storm the railroad station Sol exactly in direction of the north, is the thing is that, as we discussed yesterday, the most important part on this bridgehead is small village by the name of Blagodatne. This area is under Ukrainian control, this Blagodatne, and the Russians want to get control over this thing, but to do this, the Russians need to do one thing. They need to cut supply and support from the south and from the north. And just a minute ago, I told you that the Russians cut the Artyomovsk or Bakhmut with Soledar. That means that Ukrainians are no longer able to supply Blagodatne from the south. And the reason why the Russians try to attack Sol, this railroad station and this part of Soledar is located on the Russian side of Bakhmutka, this small river. So anyway, it is much more easier to storm this part than trying to cross one railroad, another railroad rocket, then river, and after that to get the Blagodatne. And the thing is that without taking Blagodatne, without blocking of Blagodatne, the Russians are not able to establish control over this salt mine number 7. So to storm this salt mine, to cross this railroad, first they need to cut the Blagodatne from the south and from the north. And now also the Russians reported that during these days, as a result of offensive operation in railroad station Sol, they managed to establish at least fire and artillery control over the road TO-0513 from the north. And now the Ukrainian forces who these days are located in Blagodatne is, let's say, appeared in operational encirclement from perspective of having no local roads or any roads that they can use to supply and support this area. And to tell the truth, there are some roads, as you can see, of low quality. Well, let's return back to Blagodatne on this map. Through fields, there is a way to supply and support. I'm not sure if the Russians are able to spot and destroy the supply roads in these fields. I'm not sure about this, but anyway, now this is the focal point. This is the main important things that the Russians want to achieve. The Russians want to establish control over the railroad station Sol, over the salt mine number 7, over Blagodatne, over Krasnogora, and over Paraskovivka. So this is the most important area, and the Russians are not planning to slow down, to reduce their pressure until they get this area. Or they will, the only possible thing not to achieve these goals is if the Ukrainians are able to make some kind of regrouping, effective regrouping during the next days, if they are able to bring more artillery system, more power, and to slow down the Russians and push them back from this territory. Do I think if the Ukrainians are able to do this? I believe, yes, they are able to do this, because when talking about deployment map, as you can see, they managed to deploy a lot of forces, a lot of brigades in this area. It's not the question of whether the Ukrainians are able to deploy and reinforce Soledar or not. The question is which front line, what front line the Ukrainians are able to reduce power in favor of Soledar. The Ukrainians can move their reserves to Soledar, let's say from Liman-Kupiansk front line. But in this case, the Russians will start offensive operation immediately, and they can reach this, I don't remember this river, they can reach this river. Let's take a look at the Russian sources map. Zhiribets, yes, the Russians can get this river Zhiribets immediately, and the Ukrainians will lose the bridgehead that they might use to storm Crimea. The Ukrainians can move the reserves from Kupiansk front line, but it will take a lot of time. They will have to make some hook through Chuguyev maybe, and it's also, the Ukrainians don't have so much time. They need to solve this issue in a day or two. By the end of this week, the Ukrainians need to solve the issue of Soledar, or they will lose the entire bridgehead. The Ukrainians can send their reserves from Sporное Berestova, from this area. But the Russian sources, the Russian military experts, are saying that this back is the next target that the Russians will try to attack. The Russians will, and now they do have possibility to complete every single issues with the town by the name of Veselaya. Now the Russians are able to fix all issues with Sporna and Ivana Daryevka, and to change the front line in this area, at least to make it look like this. And I believe that, and a lot of military experts are saying that this is exactly what the Russians will try to do this. This will help the Russians, and to tell the truth, and the Ukrainians to short the front line. I'm not sure if the shortening of front line is the thing that the Ukrainians want, at least these days. But anyway, the Russians now able to solve this issue and to get as close as possible to Seversk army. Furthermore, I believe that this situation might force the Ukrainians to even step back from Verkhnykamensk and Novoselovka, and the most important, the Ukrainians will be forced to step back from Bilogorovka if they don't want to be encircled. If the Ukrainians step back from Bilogorovka, the Ukrainians will have to forget about storming of Crimea for some while. The Ukrainians need some time. They need at least to wait and to survive and to stand on their position at least till March. Because as we know, on March, the Western countries promised the Ukrainians to supply and support them with modern weapons. They will receive Leopard tanks, they will receive armored vehicles, they will receive the light tanks from France, so the Ukrainians will have weapons to start their own counter-offensive operation. But the problem is, and the difficulties is that the Russians, as we discussed many videos ago, I told you that during the Winter Campaign, nobody, Ukrainians and the Russians, neither are able to solve strategic goals. And the Russians and the Ukrainians during the Winter Campaign, the only thing they are able to do is to fix or achieve some tactical goals. And Soledar is a tactical goal. And during the spring and summer, the Russians are able, using the, let's say, Soledar bridgehead, including the territory that located on the Ukrainian side of the railroad arcade, to start their offensive operation in direction of the heart of Donbas Arc operation, Slaviansk, Kramatorsk, Konstantinovka, Druzhevka. This line. And this is the thing that, and the Russians achieved this success. So if the Ukrainians want to start greatest offensive operation in, let's say, in spring or summer, they need to achieve during the winter some tactical goals. Because if they are not able to achieve, during the summer and spring, they will start from the same thing. They will start from the line that we see right now, but the problem is that in front of them, no matter they have a lot of modern weapon, they will face the same problem. Completely fortified Russian positions. And they're completely fortified all over the front line. So if the Ukrainians, let's say, want to take control over Kreminna, I believe they're already reached Kreminna as close as possible. I don't know what kind of tactical problem or tactical issue they can achieve, and I believe that Kreminna is tactical goal that the Ukrainians should have achieved by today. But they didn't do this, they couldn't do this, so that's why if the Ukrainians were able, let's say, by the end of January, to establish control over Kreminna of this territory, they will achieve some kind of operational square. And at this moment, they will be able to start their movements like a flower. It will be like Kreminna flower. I don't know how to call this area, but they haven't completed this goal. So by spring and summer, they will be at the same position before winter. And if you remember, from the beginning of winter to the beginning of spring, at least 3 months has passed. So that's mean that the Russians will have time to bring more fortification, more weapons, to train more people, and so on. Another possible tactical achievement that Ukrainians could achieve during the winter was Svatova, but they couldn't do this as well. So they will receive Western weapon and they will start everything from the beginning. Is this a solution for the Ukrainians? No, it's not. The Ukrainians could achieve, tactical achievement like to stop offensive operation Soledar, and when they receive weapon, the Russians will start the offensive operation in Soledar, but they will face completely new Ukrainian army that are completely armed with the Western weapon, and so on. As you can see, the very interesting update. As you can see, the Western source map has been updated. It's very interesting. It's something new for me. As you can see, the Western source map shows that the Russians managed somehow to penetrate the Ukrainian defense orders from Kurdyumivka, cross the canal, and now they're right in front of Chasov Yar and Konstantinovka. I'm not sure about this update because I just see this update. I haven't seen this before. Maybe it's some kind of mistake, but if the Russians really achieved this success, and as you can see there is an icon showing that the Russians somewhere in the south, that means that we can start counting days before the entire Bakhmut, Chasov Yar, Soledar, Konstantinovka front line is going to fall, because it's a real penetration that can lead to collapse of entire front line. I believe that this is a mistake, but let's wait a little bit. Maybe the Western source maps will be updated again and we will see a completely different picture. But this is very interesting. Really, this is very interesting, because when talking about the Russian sources map, of course, there are nothing like this. There are just updates about the fact that the Russians continue their effective artillery duels. And during the previous 24 hours, the Russians destroy a lot of artillery system in Seversk, as you can see, in Vivka, D-20 howitzers. And in Seversk, the Russians managed to destroy at least one Uragan. The Russians, that's it, I believe. Yes, that's it. One Uragan and maybe two Grad systems, or one of them were destroyed. So in Liman Seversk line, at least 3 artillery systems were destroyed, D-20 howitzers. When talking about the losses, the Ukrainian lost just 20 soldiers on Kupiansk and around 40 soldiers on Liman front line, so not much. When talking about Donetsk, today it was the first day when the Russians didn't include the Donetsk front line in their daily report. The thing they said that during the previous 24 hours, during the previous 72 hours, 3 days, the Ukrainian lost 700 soldiers and 300 armored vehicles. When talking about Donetsk, there are now changes. The Ukrainians attacked the northeast part of Donetsk, right in front of Avdiivka and so on, without any progress on the ground. The Russians steal, storms, and try to develop their positions in Vadiana, Oputna, Peromaiska, but for now this area is completely calm. No updates from Marinka, no updates from Pobeda, Novomykhailovka, no updates from Ugledar, no updates from nowhere on this front line. The only thing that Ukrainians lost just 20 soldiers, something around 4 armored vehicles in the South Donetsk area, in this area. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds you to condemn any violence in Ukraine. Thank you for your watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon. Have a good day. Bye bye.